This is Viviana Gonzalez, and today we will be answering my summative assessment question for paper 2. And the question is, how do two literary works both reflect and challenge the spirit of time in which they were written? For this question specifically, then we're going to be using two texts. The first is going to be Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, and then the second text is going to be Oedipus the King by Sophocles. And these two texts are different in format. They're different in the way they were written and in structure in general. But both texts present very, very much similarities in the way they are impacting the time they were written and the way they challenge certain factors. And therefore, these two texts present really good examples of how each author took its role on writing for a specific purpose. We will start by analyzing Oedipus. And with Oedipus, before diving into the text, there are certain components that you must understand beforehand. So an example, Oedipus was written by Sophocles, and it is a text that presents Greek tragedy. And Greek tragedy a Greek tragedy is ultimately drama in which a tragic hero suffers grave misfortune, which is not accidental, but is meaningful in that it is connected reasonably with the hero actions, since that's what the main role is. And then a tragedy, the main thing that it's trying to do is stresses vulnerability of human beings whose suffering is brought on by a combination of human and divine actions. And when Sophocles was trying to first create Oedipus, there's certain philosophies that he brought upon when thinking about this tragedy and formulating the format in which he was going to present the book. Plato is one of the most famous philosophers for Greek tragedy, and he argues that individuals feel pleasure when watching a Greek tragedy, and this is for a variety of reasons. One being that a lot of Greek tragedy deals with certain deaths, and at the end of the book of a tragic fall of the main character, and so therefore when the audience is able to take that in and see, they reflect on their own emotions and get some pleasure out of having to deal with them at the moment and thinking it is because of the play, when in reality they're reflecting on their own lives and the moral issues that they deal with. Aristotle then takes upon this theory and also adds that tragedy provides a venue wherein people can experience in a controlled way potentially overwhelming emotions and learn control, which says the same thing as Plato, but ultimately leads to saying that Greek tragedy helps individuals control their emotions at the moment and better deal with them, and which is why Greek tragedy in general is very popular. With that said, I think it is important to cover some of Sophocles' background. And he was born on about 496 BC at Colonus, a village just outside Athens, Greece. And his father, Sophocles, was a wealthy weapon maker and a leading citizen, both birth and wealth. Then set Sophocles apart as someone likely to play an important role in Athenian society, and that is exactly what Oedipus does as a book. It represents Athenian struggle, and so that's why individuals are likely to find pleasure in and some sort of connection in the way that it's the story is portrayed and the setting. Also, Sophocles wrote Oedipus at about 436 BC, and its purpose was to ultimately still follow some motifs that he wanted to present of moral issues that surrounded Greece and stuff. It wasn't the only book that Sophocles wrote. There was also more, so with this, he just wanted to portray ultimately Aristotle's writes that the purpose of tragedy is to arouse pity and fear in the audience, and so it creates a catharsis or cleansing of emotions, and that will later enlighten the audience and people about life and fate. Each of the plays of the Oedipus trilogy achieves this catharsis that Aristotle defined as a hallmark of all tragedy, and therefore which is why we are going to then dive into Oedipus as a whole. Okay, when talking about Oedipus, this book is very interesting. Oedipus is an ancient figure, even to the ancient Greeks, that deal with Athenian issues, which is why it's so easily like mentioned for people to connect with the book. In Thebes, which is where the story takes place, he is looked upon as like a god for those that need saving, just because Thebes at the moment is going through a very rough patch in which there's a lot of plague everywhere. And so when the timing that Oedipus comes into the story, both priests and many individuals of the city feel that it was meant to be. This is due because at the time that Sophocles wrote the book, a lot of attention was given to gods, and a lot of belief was given, and that's part of the Greek culture, that there's a lot of gods and myths that are believed upon, and so this myth in particular is very important. An example of how people and himself, Oedipus was looked upon like a god in some extent. It's in lines 161 and 166 of the book. It says, "I will bring this to the light again. King Phoebus fittingly took the care about the dead, and you too fittingly and justly you will see me in the ally, a champion of my country and the god." Although he also acknowledges that there's gods above him, he feels that his purpose in the city was also to come and marry the queen, which is ultimately his mother, and then save the people that are around him. And so that's what he strives to do through the book, because he feels like that was his purpose that he should be fulfilling. He was born not in Thebes. Well, he was born in Thebes, but then he ended up being taken away because a prophecy was said to his mother and his father that Oedipus will kill his father and marry his mother. And so the father didn't want that, and so they got rid of the baby, which was Oedipus. They put him in the mountain and he was vanished. But ultimately, he was told at a drunk while he was getting drunk, or that the same prophecy, that he would kill his father and marry his mother. So he was believed that the king and queen of Corinth, which he thought those were his fathers and his mother, but that wasn't the case. So he ends up leaving, thinking that he's gonna be protecting the family, but instead ends up back in Thebes, where he's destined to belong. And he does kill his father along the way, and he does marry his mother. This overall plays a huge issue in the way that Sophocles wants to portray relationships in the story. How incest is just not right. Has been portrayed as like a huge belief in tradition, that it's family is in value and it's one of the most important thing, as well as religion. But the moral issue here is that ultimately Oedipus is committing a sin by marrying his mother, and furthermore having children with her. Although he is not aware, he throughout the story is dealing with internal conflict that the audience already knows what it is. And so Sophocles is able to portray this just so that it can ultimately lead to the overall revelation of how Oedipus dealt with the blindness of truth. That's one of the most popular motifs. An example of this is on lines 378 to 379, where it's at the beginning of the book. Tiresias is arguing with Oedipus, and Tiresias is a blind prophet that is able to tell the future, although blind. And Oedipus is asking for help because he thinks his role is to look for help, since he can't do it, and ultimately save himself and the city which is Thebes.